These are some of the most disturbing crimes that happened in the state of Missouri, and as the video goes on, they only get darker. It was a warm summer evening on July 3rd, 2023. In a neighborhood in St. Anne, Missouri, residents were relieved that the heat was finally letting up, with several families setting up their yards, anxiously waiting to see the fireworks on the 4th of July the next day. Suddenly, a loud bang went off in one of the houses, at 4116 Jane Avenue, St. Anne, in a St. Louis County suburb, where 30-year-old Seychelle Schamberg lived with her boyfriend, 34-year-old Coleman McGillivan, and her 3 children, Kieran Stevenson, her eldest, Akuri Schamberg, her middle child, and Ushara Schamberg, her youngest. The neighbors assumed the family had set off some fireworks early, but the scene that followed told a different story. The thing is, Coleman had a very violent past before he and Seychelle started dating. He had gotten into trouble with the law on various occasions back in Oklahoma City, including an arrest for DUI, which in case you don't know means driving while intoxicated. And that happened 3 years earlier in 2020 when he was caught driving on the wrong way of the intersection and caused a rollover crash. And then he ran away from the police. And Coleman's history of violence didn't stop when he moved to Missouri around mid-2022. It followed him into Seychelle's home when they started dating in 2022. Because not long afterwards, he was caught driving with a revoked license, and it didn't help that he'd been drinking heavily for years. Coleman and Seychelle had been dating for about a year up until this point. However, the relationship wasn't a happy one. In fact, Seychelle's family had reported Coleman to the police for domestic violence on several occasions. One of Seychelle's aunts even told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that she had kicked Coleman out of the house at some point, but he returned a couple days later.
I know that she had asked him to leave several weeks ago. He was gone for about 3 days, and I believe he had committed to cleaning himself up and getting help, and so she allowed him to come back.
With how easily Coleman got angry, his criminal record, and a very unstable relationship with Seychelle, those who knew them could tell that the relationship was doomed. But what no one could have imagined was that it would end in a way that would devastate an entire neighborhood. So, back to July 3rd. 2023, when the family, like any other typical American family, was setting up for the 4th of July celebration happening the next day, the neighbors saw Coleman working in the yard with one of the children, and everything seemed fine. But then, as the evening rolled by, tensions started to rise between Seychelle and Coleman. Around 8 p.m., Seychelle noticed that Coleman was drunk and trying to drive the car, and she tried to stop him, which made him angry, and that caused them to get into a heated argument. Blinded by rage and alcohol, he pulled out his gun and pointed it at Seychelle and shot her, and she dropped to the ground immediately. After firing the shot, he turned back and saw that Akuri, Seychelle's second child, witnessed the whole thing. Horrified, Akuri ran away, but Coleman raised his gun and started firing again. One of the bullets hit Akuri in the left arm, but she managed to escape. He then went into the house and turned the gun on the other small humans, shooting Kieran and Ushara. It all ended within a few seconds, and then, as a final act of violence, Coleman turned the gun on himself and delivered one final gunshot. Across the street, Akuri ran towards the neighbors' houses, screaming, "He killed my mom. He shot her in the head. She's dead." A neighbor identified as Tulahan Bar watched in horror as this little girl ran across the street covered in blood and immediately rushed to help, tearing off his t-shirt and using it to stop the bleeding before calling 911. About 30 minutes later, at around 8:30 p.m., the police received the first distress call about multiple shots fired and rushed to the scene, hoping that it was a false alarm or fireworks mistaken for gunshots. But the second call destroyed those hopes.
A man just shot his family.
Caller, what did you see?
My daughter just came running past my building. He shot her.
When the police arrived at the scene, they had assumed that the suspect was still armed and inside the house, and one officer found Tulahan holding a badly injured Akuri, while another went to check out the scene where he found Seychelle lying in a pool of her own blood, and immediately called for backup. As soon as backup arrived, the officers found out from Tulahan that the other children were still inside the house, and so St. Anne Police Chief Aaron Jimenez ordered the officers to move inside immediately without waiting for the SWAT team to save the children. But sadly, they were already too late. When they got inside the house, they found 2 humans inside the kitchen, a lifeless Kieran and a barely alive Coleman. The officers then moved to the living room where they found Ushara with barely a pulse left. The first responders rushed Coleman and Ushara to the hospital as quickly as they could, but nothing could be done. Coleman died at the hospital and Ushara passed away shortly after. Okuri was taken to the hospital to get her wounds treated, and in the end, she was the only one who survived. The day after the incident, the city of St. Anne put up a condemned sign on the Schamberg's house, and investigators closed the case as a domestic homicide followed by self-inflicted fatality, so no trial was possible. A few days later, the police released Coleman's criminal record to the public, as well as information and body cam footage of the murder case to the public to provide more context to the entire incident. The St. Anne tragedy was a nightmare that left the community shattered, as the neighbors never saw it coming. Yet as horrific as that was, the next story was even more chilling, because this time, the killer warned everyone in advance and no one stopped him.
You can see on this split screen 2 different angles. He shatters the glass on a door, enters the school carrying a long gun.
The Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, or CVPA for short, is known by the St. Louis community as a safe space for aspiring artists to express their creativity. However, on October 24th, 2022, what should have just been another vibrant day turned dark as a former student, 19-year-old Orlando Harris, had come to express himself in a way no one could have predicted. Born on May 16, 2003, Orlando lived with his mother and 2 sisters in the Carondelet neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri. Not much is known about his life, aside from the fact that he attended CVPA and he worked at a cafeteria at a home for senior citizens. His classmates from when he still attended CVPA had mixed views about him, with some saying he was quiet and lonely, and others describing him as outgoing in drama class. His middle school teacher also described him as odd. In March 2021, Orlando's close friend and co-worker got arrested and was later convicted of murder, which caused Orlando to spiral. His personality took a dramatic turn and he was diagnosed with severe depression that made him need medication, and whenever he didn't take these medications, his mood swings would become severe. His mental state got so bad that by August 2021, he decided to take himself out of this world, but he was found in time by his co-worker, who got him admitted to a psychiatric hospital. It was the first sign that Orlando's struggles were escalating, but soon enough he was discharged from the hospital, after which he started therapy. Now, while all of this was happening, COVID was starting to die down, which meant that schools were finally opening for in-person classes. Orlando had been attending online classes for a full year and started to dislike in-person school. Despite his regular therapy sessions, Orlando didn't seem to get any better. In July 2022, he made another attempt to check himself out of this world, but he was saved in time again and taken back to the psychiatric hospital. And this was when his family realized that he needed more help. He started seeing Dr. Hetal Patel, a psychiatrist from Washington University. During his consultation, Orlando admitted he had thought about attacking CVPA, his old school. To save him before it was too late, Dr. Hetal created an emergency safety plan to help him keep his thoughts in check. She also prescribed some medication for him, but he refused to take it and constantly shut down her suggestions to go to therapy. Despite the confusion, she didn't see Orlando as a threat. She didn't report him to the authorities, which turned out to be a grave mistake. Because in August 2022, 19-year-old Orlando started writing his manifesto, declaring that he wanted to be the next mass shooter of 2022. He also detailed his plans to shoot up CVPA and take the life of at least 30 people, then finish off by checking himself out of this world or letting the police do it for him. His plans were incredibly detailed, with a supply list that consisted of an AR-15, a semi-automatic rifle, as well as the floor plans for the school, specific targets, and even a list of previous school shootings. He also made hateful comments towards the LGBTQ+ community, detailing his plans to target them specifically. By September, he decided to completely skip his follow-up treatment with Dr. Hetal. The clinic tried to contact him, but he never responded. About 2 months later, on October 8th, Orlando went to a licensed arms dealer to buy a gun, but after immediately running an FBI background check on him, the guy refused to sell to him. Denied by a licensed dealer, Orlando turned to a private seller a few days later who just simply handed him the rifle. Now, in Missouri, it's a crime to sell guns to criminals and people with mental health issues, but private dealers don't need to do background checks on their clients, which is why Orlando was able to get the gun. He also got more equipment, like over 600 rounds of ammunition, 12 high-capacity 30-round magazines, a body armor vest, tactical gear, and a chest rig. Then he ordered a home delivery for them. A week later, on October 15th, 2022, the the packages got to his house, and one of Orlando's sisters found the packages and panicked. She searched his room and found the AR-15 rifle Orlando bought in an old TV box, which only intensified her fear. She immediately called her mum, Tanya, who reported what they found to the mental health services. They advised Tanya to call 911 since the ammunition they discovered was an immediate threat. However, without a red flag law, which allows authorities to temporarily remove firearms from people who show signs of being a danger to themselves or others, police couldn't take the weapons since Orlando was legally allowed to own a gun because he was 19 at the time.
You want to own a firearm, you're an American, you're over 18, you're allowed to have a firearm if you want a firearm.
Instead, they told the family to lock them away, while also advising the parents to have Orlando committed to a mental health facility due to his mental health issues. Orlando's family took the directive and loaded all the gear into Orlando's sister's car and drove to a storage unit about 5 miles away from CVPA. Then they spoke with Orlando about the advice from the police and he agreed to comply, or so they thought. Over the next few days, Orlando's family constantly kept tabs on him. They searched his room, checked his mail, monitored all his conversations, and stayed in contact with his mental health providers. But Orlando still kept writing in his notebook, talking about how he told 2 psychiatrists about his plan to shoot up the school and constantly called himself an isolated loner with no friends, family, or even a girlfriend, calling it the perfect storm for a mass shooter. And then a few days later, Orlando vanished, and so did the items in the storage unit. In the early hours of October 24th, 2022, Orlando took his gun and other supplies and loaded them into his blue 2012 Dodge Avenger, then made his way down to CVPA to enact his plan. At 9:02 a.m., while the students were going about their daily routine, he parked his car on Arsenal Street near the school's second building and left all his notes inside his car. He went down to the school and, at 9:08 a.m., dressed in all black, Orlando opened fire on the side door of the building, shooting out the glass before walking in. A security guard, Jermaine Yancey, saw him and immediately ran into the school to warn the staff. Meanwhile, Orlando made his way down the dance studio. There he saw a girl in the hallway and immediately shot at her, but missed, allowing her to escape. Then, as the students in the dance studio were stretching, Orlando walked in and threatened them with his gun, then fired a shot at Alexandria Bell. A sophomore who loved dance was struck in the torso. Jermaine reportedly saw her running away from the dance studio with her arm dangling at her side. Sadly, the medical team couldn't reach her in time before she passed. Meanwhile, Orlando tried to shoot the other students, but the rifle jammed. He then left the dance studio and went upstairs into the main building on the second floor. Upon arriving at the second floor, he immediately started shooting at the staff members in the hallway, but missed again, as they quickly found shelter in the offices and locked themselves in. The school announced over the intercom, "Miles Davis is in the building," the signal they always use to alert those in the school that there's an active shooter in the building. But even after the announcement, Orlando continued his shooting spree. He fired through the door window of a classroom, but no one was hit. He then spotted another female guard and chased her down to the bathroom with the gun, screaming slurs at her. Scared for her life, she quickly locked herself in the bathroom. Then Orlando tried to shoot her through the door, but the rifle jammed again. Orlando then found his way to the third floor. There, he chased a male student down the staircase before missing his step and falling down the stairs while the student escaped. He got back up, removed his vest behind a pillar, and went back to the third floor. He then made his way up to the classroom of 61-year-old Jean Kuchka, with 17 students inside. He noticed that the door was locked and shot it open, then walked in and yelled, "You're all going to die." Jean gathered up all her courage and stood in front of her students in an attempt to shield her students from Orlando, who then raised his rifle and took the shot, delivering one fatal wound to her torso. He fired more shots in the direction of the students despite his rifle repeatedly jamming, which ended up wounding 4 students. In desperation, students jumped from windows, some injuring themselves in the process. A few others ran away, while 2 students hid in the classroom until the police arrived. Orlando eventually left Jean's classroom and went to the computer lab. There, he waited outside, looked around for anyone approaching, then entered the lab, and found a space behind a wall where he cleared the jams in his rifle and reloaded it. At the time Orlando started his attack, a 911 call was made to the police, and by 9:15 a.m., around the time Orlando had made it to the third floor, about 7 minutes after all of this began, the police had arrived at the scene. They immediately heard gunshots as soon as they entered the building, and followed the sounds to locate Orlando in the computer room, and a confrontation arose. Orlando fired around at them and missed. Then they fired back at him, eventually ending him and his mission. One of the officers involved, whose daughter attended CVPA, texted her simply, "I got him." About an hour and a half later, by 10:45 a.m., the building was secured and handed over to the investigators. Various organizations like the SLMPD, FBI, and ATF searched the school, Orlando's house, and his car, where they found his manifesto. The FBI also opened a website where the public could upload photos and videos related to the case, and the school was closed for over a week. Meanwhile, the shooting sparked national outrage, with leaders demanding stronger gun laws. Then President Joe Biden also posted a tweet calling out Missouri for not having a red flag law and demanded that it implement an assault weapon ban. Orlando had planned everything months in advance, but our next story took mere minutes to get deadly, and it all unfolded in broad daylight.
These are still images from that video showing a man sitting on the curb while another man stands right next to him as he loads a gun.
Our next story starts at a Shell gas station in downtown St. Louis, a place where violence was routine. According to Brad Waldrop, who is the owner of some properties in the area and a member of Citizens for a Greater Downtown St. Louis, it is estimated that by March 2023 alone, 600 calls for service have been made at this location since 2019, with about 16 to 20 of these being about shootings. So, in February 2023, when the police received another 911 call about a shooting, it didn't seem out of the ordinary, but what happened that morning was unlike anything the city had seen. Downtown St. Louis itself also faced a lot of public safety crisis. People were homeless, drugs were openly being sold and used, and there were barely any police to deal with these issues. The residents and business owners constantly complained about these issues and demanded more law enforcement and accountability for certain properties, including the Shell station. But with the increasing insecurity and the police not being available, some people decided to deal with their issues themselves. On the morning of Monday, February 27, 2023, sometime before 10 a.m., two men got into a fight at the Shell gas station. David Saldana, a homeless man in his 40s who was struggling with mental health but was known to be harmless, crossed paths with 23-year-old Deshaun Thomas. Now, there's no information on what started the fight between the two, but it seems to have escalated when the two left the gas station and went into the street, still trading blows. But the event that followed crossed a line that should have never been crossed. At about 10 a.m., David went across the street just in front of the Globe building, and Deshaun followed him. Then, as he got closer to David, Deshaun pulled out a gun and shot David in the back. David ran for his life, afraid and bleeding out, with Deshaun on his tail, but his body failed him. He fell and hit the ground hard, and seeing he couldn't escape, he sat up on the curb as Deshaun caught up to him. David begged for his life, but Deshaun stood over him and committed an execution in broad daylight. Almost immediately, David was gone. Deshaun calmly walked away from David's body and fled the scene on foot, hoping to escape the consequences of what he did. However, he failed to account for one thing. He shot David in an open space. The whole incident had been caught on camera in graphic detail by a bystander who witnessed the whole thing from a nearby building, as well as nearby surveillance cameras. There were eyewitnesses on the street, in surrounding buildings, and even construction workers who had seen everything in real time, and many of them had immediately called 911 as soon as the incident happened. The police immediately started searching for him using surveillance videos from their real-time crime center, a surveillance monitoring hub where officers track movements using citywide camera networks, and 911 calls to track his movements. Just 5 hours after the shooting, a patrol officer spotted Deshaun trying to enter a St. Louis public library, just 6 blocks away from where he had shot David. They arrested him without a fight and found a gun and shell casing still on him. He was then booked and held at the SLMPD station without bond. The St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office released an official statement on the case the next day. Deshaun was officially charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Court documents confirmed the execution-style killing, leaving no doubt about what happened. The police confirmed that the incident started as a personal dispute, and Deshaun's court date was set for the next day, March 1st. Around the same time that the statement was released, the video of the incident was uploaded to the internet, and many social media platforms flagged and took the video down for graphic content, but it had already spread by then. Within days, the video gained millions of views. People from all over the world expressed outrage at the level of violence and insecurity happening in downtown St. Louis. Downtown residents expressed fear when they spoke about what happened. Local business owner Syed Sajid spoke out about the incident and mentioned that he had arrived at the location some minutes after the incident, and after hearing what had happened, he recalled how disturbed he was when he realized that he could have been there just 7 minutes earlier. St. Louis Metropolitan Police Major Ryan Cousins also said that the incident was very unnerving because it happened in a public space in broad daylight. Because of these incidents, US citizens began to criticize Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner and demand reforms in downtown. Senator Josh Hawley, the US Senator for Missouri, retweeted the video of the incident on Twitter and posted, "Kim Gardner must go. Prosecute the criminals." The case reignited debate over police control, with lawmakers arguing whether the city could handle its own security. Representative Brad Criss pushed for returning police control to the state, using the incident as an example. Almost 3 months later, in May 2023, Deshaun appeared in the St. Louis Circuit Court and pleaded not guilty to the charges brought against him. The case then went to trial and lasted for almost 2 years before the court finally made a decision. In January 2025, Deshaun's trial was suspended when he was declared mentally unfit, leaving the case unsolved. Deshaun was then admitted into the Missouri Department of Mental Health for evaluation and treated by Judge Craig Higgins. The department was required to do an evaluation for Deshaun to determine whether or not he would regain his mental fitness, and keep doing evaluations every 6 months after that. For now, there are no updates on his current mental state, when his trial resumes, or if he'll be released. The case remains suspended until he is officially declared mentally fit. Deshaun Thomas was a killer caught by the system, but what happens when the system itself abandons a dying man? Our next story takes us to Forest Park, where the most disturbing thing captured on camera was done by the ones who were meant to prevent it.
We better take this motherfucker in.
We ain't taking this.
Ain't taking 30 minutes.
Let's cruise around and come back.
On September 10th, 2023, 29-year-old Ryan Alejandro Rodriguez Rivera dialed 911 and told the responders that he wanted to end his time on Earth. Immediately, 2 officers were dispatched to save him, former SLMPD officers Austin Frazier and Ty Warren. The 2 officers rushed to the scene, but what unfolded on their body cams shocked the city. Alejandro lived in St. Louis, Missouri. There's not much we know about him, except that his mom lived in Puerto Rico and had no history of violence. Days before the incident, he paid his rent in advance and left a final message, a sign that he had already planned his end. On the day he went through with his plan around 6:13 p.m., Alejandro went to Forest Park and made the 911 call, and exactly 13 minutes after he called 911, officers Austin and Ty got to the Forest Park first. When officers found him, Alejandro was barely clinging onto life with a gunshot wound to his head, barely breathing beneath a tree. Ty said to Austin,
We better take this motherfucker in.
but Austin replied,
We ain't taking this.
Ain't taking 30 minutes.
Let's cruise around and come back.
Instead of rushing Alejandro to safety, the officers joked about their shift ending, then left the scene without doing anything, without even bothering to notify dispatch, request EMS, offer first aid, secure the scene, or search for a firearm. As they walked away from the dying Alejandro, Austin joked that, "They're gonna find this, and we're gonna be like, oh you found him?" And they both laughed. They got back into their patrol car and drove away through the city as if nothing had happened. The whole incident, starting from the 911 call, had happened in under 40 minutes, but the officers purposely delayed help by at least 27 minutes. About 8 minutes after they left, Austin and Ty circled back to the park and pretended to look for Alejandro, as if they had just gotten there for the first time. A third officer, Officer Timothy Tubbs, arrived on the scene around the same time as them and joined in the search. He immediately found Alejandro and radioed dispatch.
Have EMS respond for one subject, not conscious but breathing, barely,
and requested priority medical aid for Alejandro. More officers quickly arrived on the scene and secured the area, then checked for Alejandro's pulse, which was really weak. Then they administered first aid and searched for the gun he was shot with, but couldn't find it anywhere near the scene. While all this was going down, Austin and Ty went back to their car and left again, abandoning the scene a second time. The other officers noticed that they had left and made confused and annoyed comments about the two.
You know, it's f***ed up. Warren and Frazier just left.
Why?
I don't know.
Austin and Ty, however, were not bothered at all. As far as they were concerned, they had gotten away with it. However, what these men hadn't remembered was that Ty's body cam was recording the entire time. Austin's body cam was not activated at the time, although the reason was never clarified. Everything had been caught in real time, and it was just a matter of time before it came to light. At 6:53 p.m, EMS finally arrived and Alejandro was taken to a St. Louis area hospital, but by the time they got there, nothing could be done, and Alejandro passed away at the hospital. The St. Louis Medical Examiner's Office ruled his passing as a case of self-deletion. However, because the gun was never found, some believed Alejandro had been shot elsewhere and moved, while others thought someone had taken the weapon after he pulled the trigger. Either way, the missing gun was confirmed to have been stolen, and the NIBN check, a national database that cross-references ballistics evidence, had produced no hit so far. Investigators are still searching for the gun to this day. As for the officers, they were finally exposed. During a routine review of police body cam footage, SLMPD discovered their footage from that day. The Missouri Attorney General's Office and the Department of Public Safety filed administrative charges against both officers for reckless disregard for public safety, gross misconduct, and moral corruption. Almost immediately, both officers were terminated from the police force. Ty, during his disciplinary hearing, later admitted to his supervisors that he made a poor decision and was influenced by Austin's peer pressure, but it didn't matter. The two men could no longer be police officers. SLMPD spokesperson Mitch McCoyrell made a statement that the two individuals are no longer employed by the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. SLMPD holds its officers to the highest of standards. Even with the footage, prosecutors filed no criminal charges. By early 2025, nearly 16 months after the incident, the police body cam footage was released to the public, and it blew up immediately. People nationwide were outraged by the former police officer's actions, demanding better training and proper accountability from the police. After seeing what had happened to her son, Alejandro's mothers condemned the officers, saying their actions showed a lack of humanity. She even said, "I hope the full weight of the law falls on these so-called police officers." People reached out to Austin and Ty to ask questions, but they stayed quiet. Sergeant Donnie Walters, president of the Ethical Society of Police, called Austin and Ty's actions deplorable. He claimed that the two men had set back years of work rebuilding public trust in the police, and former St. Louis County Police Chief Tim Fitch said that Ty should have overridden Austin's decision and called EMS immediately.
It's disgusting. It's really disgusting.
He also criticized the SLMPD for not addressing the video sooner. The Forest Park officers were undone by the very cameras they forgot were rolling. But as we leave St. Louis for Kansas City, the cameras tell a different story, one shielded by the law itself.
We stopped the video before the shooting. The next moments show the brothers trying to leave.
The Garrett brothers were known to be very loving members of the community. 32-year-old Tyler D. Garrett was the ultimate dad figure, and he had stepped up as an uncle or father figure to children with absent dads, always attending their games and meets, giving huge hugs and contagious laughter. His elder brother, on the other hand, 35-year-old Byron A. Garrett, was a huge family man who loved nothing more than his 7-year-old daughter, Ariel Garrett, and he would take her everywhere as his best friend. He also worked diligently for the city and always did his best to show fierce love and accountability to his family with his voice and unmatched smile. The two brothers were so dearly loved by the community that when the news of what happened got to the residents, it shook the whole neighborhood. Between the morning and early afternoon of July 20th, 2025, 27-year-old Emmanuel Hernandez was driving his car in Kansas City, Missouri, near the Ginot Manor apartment complexes. Meanwhile, Tyler and Byron were driving in their car with Ariel in the back. Now, according to the Garrett family and attorney Howard Lotvin, the brothers tried to warn Emmanuel he was driving the wrong way, and that simple act sparked a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Because Emmanuel didn't take the suggestion well. He got out of his car and confronted the brothers, and the argument quickly escalated. The brothers, fed up with Emmanuel, got into their car and drove off, but Emmanuel wasn't done with them. He followed them in his car for at least 3 minutes before they turned into the Conco gas station at Truman Road and Brooklyn Avenue. Emmanuel followed them in, and that's where things took a dark turn. At around 1:15 p.m., the Garrett brothers got to the gas station and parked their car, and Emmanuel followed in right after. But he parked near a different exit. Then he went back to the brothers, angry, and another argument started. Fed up with him, Tyler punched Emmanuel multiple times in the head and face, but instead of attacking back, Emmanuel simply backed away from the brothers towards his car. The brothers then walked away from him and went into the convenience store to pay for gas. However, Emmanuel was already planning something. He waited about 3 minutes before following the brothers into the store, then started another fight with them while they were still in line. Again, Tyler responded by hitting him in the face, but Byron never raised a fist to Emmanuel the entire time. Then, inside the store, Emmanuel pulled a gun and opened fire. The Garrett brothers tried to escape, but both were struck down. He kept shooting at them even after they were down. He then stood over the brothers and looked at them. They were gone. As a one final F you to them, he hit Byron in the head with his gun, then calmly walked out of the store. After the killings, Emmanuel called 911 himself, insisting it was self-defense. He told the dispatcher and later the detectives that he feared for his life, and Tyler's punches made him feel dizzy and made him feel like he was going to black out. When police arrived, they took him into custody without a fight and treated him at Truman Medical Center for the injuries Tyler had inflicted. Police also found 17 shell casings and surveillance footage that captured the entire attack. On July 21, 2025, County Prosecutor Melissa Johnson filed charges against Emmanuel, 1 count of voluntary manslaughter and 1 count of armed criminal action, but those were only for the death of Byron Garrett. Emmanuel was protected by the Missouri Stand Your Ground law for Tyler's death, which states that a person has no duty to retreat and may use deadly force if they reasonably believe it's necessary to protect themselves from serious harm, so no charges were filed. According to the prosecutor, only Byron's death was charged as voluntary manslaughter because he continued shooting even after Byron retreated and was on the ground, and even hit him in the head after. Emmanuel was initially held without bond in Jackson County Detention Center. He was later placed on a $50,000 bond. He paid the required 10%, $5,000, and was released the same day. Meanwhile, attorney Howard Lotvin obtained the 70-second inside store surveillance video and provided it exclusively to Fox 4 News. And the Garrett family condemned the charges as too lenient, calling it premeditated murder and demanded accountability. A cousin, Danielle Palmer, said,
"This is premeditated murder. This is not a stand your ground case."
They called out the bond placed on him for being too low for a double homicide case. They also claimed that Emmanuel was the aggressor for following them into the store after the fight in the parking lot had ended, and still shooting and pistol whipping after the threat was gone. The family also pointed out that Byron's 7-year-old daughter, Ariel, had witnessed the confrontation, a detail police overlooked. Prosecutor Melissa Johnson released a statement in late July to explain how the charges followed the law and why there were no charges for Tyler's death. She explained that Tyler struck first in both cases, and even though Byron didn't physically attack Emmanuel, he was blocking the exit, blocking Emmanuel's escape. There was nothing to prove that Emmanuel planned to end their lives or that he carried an illegal weapon, because he had a concealed carry permit allowing him to carry a hidden firearm in public. And so, his actions after the threat had ended were classified as manslaughter rather than murder. The prosecutor's office met with the Garrett family to explain this to them, but they refused to accept the explanation. The office also invited various community leaders and other people of community influence to watch the video of the incident for them to help deal with the public misinformation, stating they would review any new footage or witness statements. Somewhere between late July and early August, the grand jury reviewed the case and the charges, and they chose to stick with the existing charges. A new surveillance video showing a road rage approach and a full parking lot sequence was found and filed in discovery. Independent attorney Dan Ross confirmed Emmanuel's self-defense claim inside the store, deepening the divide between law and public opinion. His last known court date was August 26, 2025. There hasn't been any news since then, and the case is still open with Jackson County's local prosecution. After the surveillance videos went public, there have been public debates concerning the Missouri Stand Your Ground law, excessive force after threats end, and gun violence in public spaces. To this day, the Garrett family is still pushing for first-degree murder charges for both brothers, but the prosecution still hasn't filed any charges for Taylor's death. The Garrett brothers died at the hands of a stranger they tried to help. However, the next family we meet in Kansas City didn't have to look as far for their killer. He was already inside their home. It's July 16th, 2021, and the Kansas City Police Department was 3 days into a brutal murder investigation, canvassing the city for anyone who might know something. When some officers visited 38-year-old Rahman Michael Mohammed, a family member of the deceased, at his home, he told them he wanted to check on his family, but what he said next would break the case wide open. Rahman already had a criminal history. You see, sometime in 2020, he had been released from prison and was on parole. Not only that, but his father had also passed away over a year before the incident. Up until that point, he'd been living on and off with his dad on East 46th Street and Montgell Avenue in East Kansas City, Missouri, while he was still alive, but later moved in with his mum, Shirley Muhammad, and siblings Taylor and Jaylyn Ransom in the 3200 block of Woodland Avenue, Kansas City, Missouri in June 2020. Sometime after that, he moved back into his dad's place permanently. His neighbors claimed that Rahman mostly kept to himself, but his family saw a different side of him, and they were getting increasingly worried about his erratic behavior. His mum constantly shared her worries with other relatives about his aggression, directing profanities at her, and possible psychotic episodes since his release from prison. A licensed counselor, Amanda Davis, later said in court that his behavior matched symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia and psychotic episodes, a condition where the mind can't seem to separate a person's thoughts from reality, causing hallucinations that feel realistic. One day, a family member suggested a welfare check to know how Rahman was doing. They went to his house, accompanied by another family member, but they were unsettled by Rahman's constant threats to end his brother, Jaylyn. On July 12, 2021, sometime during the day, Rahman paid a visit to Shirley's house. He didn't see Jaylyn, though, because Jaylyn was at work. Tyler went to work her shift at the Research Medical Center between 11:04 a.m. and 7:11 p.m. After she clocked out, she spent the night at her boyfriend's house, then went back to the house the next morning. On July 13th, Jaylyn went for his shift at U-Haul between 4:58 a.m. and 4:27 p.m., and Shirley also worked her shift at Kansas City Area Transit Authority, popularly known as Ride KC, between 7:15 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. The family went about their day as usual. None of them knew it would be their last. On the afternoon of July 13th, 2021, Rahman went to his family's house again. His mother let him in, thinking it was like any other visit. Suddenly, Rahman turned on his own family, stabbing his mother, his sister, Tyler, and his brother, Jaylyn, to death in their own home. Surveillance footage showed Tyler's car driven by a man resembling Rahman, linking him to the crime. Then at around 8 p.m., he went to the Truman Medical Center to get his wrist treated. He claimed he was roughhousing with his friends. He stayed there till 2 a.m. the next day, even though he wasn't treated. The day after the stabbings, Shirley's and Tyler's workplaces noticed they hadn't come into work when it was time for their shifts without calling ahead. Over the next 2 or 3 days, family members tried calling both of them as well as Jaylyn, but they were met with no response, which made them worried, so they went to check on them. One relative went by their house and found the back door ajar. They called the police, unaware of what was behind the open door. The KCPD soon arrived for the welfare check. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong because the doors were intact and the dog was cared for, so they announced themselves and then began to search the house. But what they found stopped them dead in their tracks. Tyler was found lying flat on her back on a bed in the southwest bedroom on the second floor with a $100 bill on her forehead. Meanwhile, Jaylyn was found seated on the stair landing on the first floor with another $100 bill placed across his eyes. And Shirley was found on her knees on the floor in the southeast bedroom on the second floor, face pressed against the bed mattress, yet another $100 bill on the back of her head. There was blood all over the floor, walls, and stairs, and a mangled, serrated knife was also found on the second floor common area floor. According to Sonny Chukwani, an acquaintance of the dead, the way the bodies were arranged looked pathetic and like voodoo.
It is a heinous crime, and it's pathetic. It's like a voodoo.
And no one really understood why they were arranged that way. Homicide detectives were immediately deployed to the scene, and once they were done identifying the bodies, they officially opened the investigation. That night, dozens of loved ones gathered together to mourn in a parking lot in Kansas City. They released purple and blue balloons in their honor and sent them off with prayers while the mourners comforted each other. Friends stated that the family had a perfect bond. Tyler's boyfriend, Jeremiah Gaston, also had similar things to say. While all this was happening, the police were still searching for the suspect, and it didn't take the police long before they turned their focus to Rahman, and they got a warrant to search Shirley's home. Crime scene investigators processed the scene and took in evidence, including the knife, and family members were cooperative, and they gave the police Rahman's history of mental health and aggression. Because of this information, the police took Rahman as their main suspect and began surveilling his house. On July 16th, around 2:41 in the morning, patrol officers found Rahman sitting on the front porch of his house. house. He then asked them for a ride to Shirley's place because he was concerned that something might have happened to his mum and siblings. The detectives came to him and asked him to follow them to the station for questioning, and he willingly went with them. Rahman denied being at the house, but the fresh cuts and bloodstains told a different story, and this led them to start investigating him. They obtained warrants for his clothing, DNA cheek swab, cell phone, and photos, and from their investigation, they discovered the keys to Tyler's Hyundai, which directly tied him to the missing vehicle, and a Samsung phone that was linked to the crime scene through GPS records. They also got his hospital records and confirmed he went to the hospital that day, and finally, they got a warrant for his house, where they found blood in multiple areas, including a pair of boxers. Just before he got arrested, according to the neighbors, he seemed very jumpy, knocking on doors and wearing unfamiliar clothes. One neighbor, David Stewart, said that he couldn't even recognize him. David said he assumed that Rahman had violated his parole, but when he found out what actually happened, he found it very unsettling because it was family. On July 19th, 2021, Rahman was charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of armed criminal action by the Jackson County prosecutors and was placed on a bond of $500,000. Loved ones of the victims celebrated the charges, and Jeremiah made a public statement directed at Rahman, saying that he was glad about the arrest and hoped he got what you deserve for taking 3 innocent lives.
I hope you get what you deserve, because you didn't have to kill 3 innocent people. You had to take 3 innocent lives.
On July 26th, his next court date was set. There's not much on what happened after that, but the case is still making its way through the courts, with his mental health diagnosis likely playing a role in how it's resolved. We've seen what happens when the system fails to catch a killer, but what happens when the system is the killer? Our next story covers an exchange between an officer and a citizen gone horribly wrong.
Are you okay? Are you hurt? Okay, can we put the baby down, come here and talk and figure out what's going on?
On November 7th, 2024, Independence officers Jordan White and Chad Cox responded to a 911 call about a domestic assault at Orville Spring Apartments, 16801 E. Larkspur Lane, Independence, MO, and went to the house. At the house, they found 34-year-old Maria Pike holding her 2-month-old daughter, Destiny Hope, while hiding in a closet. They tried to talk to her but found it very difficult to. Then, a remark about taking her baby escalated everything, and it turned this routine call into a tragedy. Our story begins in 1990 when Maria and her twin sister, Nina Book, were born in an orphanage in Russia. They lived there for 6 years before getting adopted and moving to the US with their new family. At the time of the incident, Maria lived with her partner, Mitchell Holder Jr., who was also Destiny's father, at the Orville Spring Apartments in Independence, Missouri. Maria was known to have a history of mental health issues and anger problems. In fact, after Destiny was born, she struggled with postpartum depression and was put on medication for it, and her family did their best to help her out. Jordan, one of the responding officers, once worked as an officer in Nampa, Idaho for 11 months before he was involuntarily terminated for reasons unknown to the public, but Jordan's past termination raised questions about his judgment, foreshadowing what was to come. At about 1:54 p.m. on November 7th, 2024, Destiny's aunt, Talisha Coombs, paid a visit to Maria and Destiny, but things went south. Talisha and Maria got into a physical fight that led to Maria assaulting Talisha. Talisha called 911 and reported the assault, and told Mitchell that she was pressing charges against Maria. She thought that the police would arrest her, take her into custody, and give her the help that she needed to deal with postpartum depression. Some police officers, including Jordan, Chad, and at least one other officer, responded to the 911 call, and when they got to the house, Mitchell refused to let them in, even after they tried talking to him, but assistant property manager Davin Galaney persuaded him to just let Jordan and Chad inside. But when they got in, they couldn't find Maria. They had to search the entire house before she was finally found hiding in a closet with Destiny in her hands. The officers asked her questions about her safety, but she couldn't speak. She could only nod and use hand gestures or sign language. And so she used sign language to spell L-I-E-S to the officer, and Mitchell joined the officers in urging her to let go of Destiny, but Maria clung tighter. They even brought Code 33 with DFS, which was code for Emergency Child Custody with the Division of Family Services. Once she heard this, she moved to the bed, still holding Destiny. The officers tried to calmly assure her that they just wanted to help and tried to keep the baby safe, but Maria didn't agree. She gave them the middle finger and licked it as an act of defiance. Seeing as they couldn't get through to her, the officers called the crisis intervention team or a mental health co-responder to talk to her, but they couldn't make it into the house in time. While still holding the baby, Maria Maria reached under a cloth and pulled out a large butcher-like kitchen knife and suddenly stood up. She turned towards the officers and lunged at them with the knife raised above her heads. First at the other officer, Chad, who ran into the hallway, then Jordan, all this with Destiny still in her arms. Backed into a corner of the closet with no way to escape, Jordan drew his gun and fired, but missed Maria, and the bullet struck Destiny in the head instead. Maria jumped back in shock, and in the chaos, Jordan fired again, hitting Maria multiple times. He shot a total of 4 bullets, the one that hit Destiny in the head, and 3 went into Maria's back, neck, and waist. Witness statements made it unclear whether or not Maria actually carried a knife, but the police believed she did, but her family argued that they never even saw a knife, and she wasn't even armed or holding Destiny hostage. Mitchell saw the entire thing unfold in real time. According to him, when Destiny was shot, blood splattered on him and his glasses. Mitchell's screams cut through the room.
"You killed her,"
with his daughter's blood on his face. The officers immediately administered aid to save Maria's life, but nothing could be done. Maria also passed away. Destiny was taken to the hospital by another officer. She was alive for a few minutes in absolute pain, gasping, choking, and crying until she took her last breath. The officers who were involved in the case were put on administrative leave while they were being investigated, which was transferred to the Jackson County Police Involved Investigative Team, PIIT, led by the Blue Springs Police Department. They went through body cam footage and conducted witness interviews. The news of the shooting came as a shock to family members, especially Talisha, who stated that she only wanted help for Maria and not what happened instead. Mitchell told his sister everything he witnessed and sent his story to the Kansas City Defender. About a week after the incident, dozens of people gathered for a candlelight vigil at the Oval Springs Apartments, organized by the property manager, Carrie Lufkin, who addressed those who came about community strength and gave teddy bears to kids. They also made posters with photos and messages, and the Jackson County prosecutor at the time, Jean Peters Baker, attended the vigil as well to show her support for the family. A GoFundMe account was created to cover Destiny's funeral costs, and it managed to raise over $3,000 in a few days. The family also demanded that the body cam footage be released and that the officers involved be disciplined for the loss of Maria and Destiny. They lamented over how Destiny would have turned 3 months old by then. The independent police, however, claimed that the incident only happened because there was a knife. On the day before Thanksgiving, they released a highly edited 3-minute clip from the 20-minute footage, which showed Maria moving to the bed, grabbing the knife, and attacking the 2 officers. Chief Adam Dustman also stated that Maria was indeed armed, which led to the shooting. However, the public criticized them for releasing the video during the festive period without giving the affected family a warning. Kansas City Law Enforcement Accountability Project, KCLEAP, called it gaslighting, and they demanded the full video. Mitchell also requested to see the full unedited footage. Then, on December 1st, 2024, family members staged a rally outside the Independent Police Headquarters with KCLEAP and other advocates and demanded full unedited body cam, audio, transparency, and accountability from them. One of the advocates, co-founder of KCLEAP, Steve Young, criticized the police for not bringing the social worker into the conversation with Maria and not putting themselves in harm's way to save Destiny. Talisha told the IPD that Maria just wanted help, and instead, she got shot. The IPD responded to the criticisms on Facebook and said they would commit themselves to transparency as far as the law would allow, but they couldn't say any more till the investigation ended. Steve reviewed the clip that was released to the public and made indirect comments about the IPD redacting their use of force policies by praising agencies that shared theirs, and meanwhile, PIIT continued reviewing evidence. But with no specific timeline, the family felt stuck waiting for answers. According to Blue Springs PD, they were in the final phases of the investigation by late 2024, but there was no completion date. Some months later in 2025, they finally got their answer. On March 14, 2025, Jackson County prosecutor Melissa Johnson, who had already come in after Jean, ruled Jordan's actions as justified under Missouri law, and no criminal charges were filed against him. Also, according to Jackson, there was no evidence that Jordan deliberately shot Destiny, and prosecutor Melissa acknowledged that it was indeed a tragedy, but the law didn't see his actions as a crime. But for the family, all this felt like betrayal. Talisha couldn't accept the ruling. To her, the officer knew what he was doing and should be charged. The week after the decision was released, the IPD released the full unedited video of the incident. The footage detailed the 20-minute encounter, including officers' de-escalation attempts, Pike's gestures, and the rapid 5-second escalation to shooting. Chief Adam Dustman spoke to reporters, identifying the officers and telling them they found no evidence of wrongdoing during the administrative review. He also defended the edited clip that was released the previous year, and various experts, like retired ATF agent Jim Balthazar, called the incident tragic but reasonable, since the knife Maria used was a deadly weapon. Chief Adam restated that Jordan was justified, saying that officers never want to take lives, but they may still be faced with those situations in real life. The family, however, wasn't satisfied. Between March 20th and 21st, 2025, the family fought back with a wrongful death lawsuit, accusing the officers of recklessness and failure to protect. They also claimed that the officers entered the house to take Destiny away, and they ignored the co-responder at the door, who could have talked to Maria, who they claimed was never a threat. Attorney Tom Porto spoke against the officers, emphasizing that their duty was to protect the vulnerable. The police stayed silent and kept the officers on duty, which deepened the community's anger. We've seen the worst case that Missouri has to offer, from negligence to rage, but this final case is perhaps the most disturbing of all. It's the story of Graden Denham, a man whose intrusive thoughts got the better of him.
I'm still convinced he had nothing to do with that. I produced them with evidence that there could be another potential suspect or other suspects.
Graden Lane Denham was a huge fan of the 1999 crime show called The Boondock Saints. More specifically, he was obsessed with the way the killers placed pennies on the victims' eyes, and that obsession eventually spilled into reality. He decided to act on it, using his own family as his test subjects. Graden was born around 1991 or 1992, putting him in his mid-20s at the time. By his early 20s, Graden's life unraveled into meth addiction and mental health struggles. He also had a criminal record, which included a prior misdemeanor assault conviction in Johnson County, Missouri, back in 2016, where he was sentenced to 2 years probation and 20 hours of community service. He had his driver's license revoked for the traffic violations and unpaid child support for the 2 kids he had with his ex, who is publicly only known as DM, as her name wasn't revealed to the public, so I'll be calling her Diane. He lived with his grandparents, Russell and Shirley Denham, his sister, Heather Agger, and her infant son, Mason Schiavone. Relatives and later prosecutors described the family as loving. However, Graden didn't seem to have the best relationship with them, as tensions were reportedly rising between him and his family. On February 7, 2016, a next-door neighbor who I'll be calling Jack was watching the Super Bowl when Graden came knocking at his door. He told them that his grandparents don't have much longer to live, and Jack, confused, asked Graden why he was at his door and not with his grandparents. Around the same time, a friend of the grandparents said she was leery of Graden's changing behavior, and his grandma agreed with her. The friends then warned Russell and Shirley, Graden's grandparents, to be very careful. Over the next few days, Graden's relationship with his family seemed to be getting worse. On February 18, 2016, Jack overheard Russell tell Graden to take out the trash, but Graden responded by flipping him off and storming into the house. The next day, Diane came to visit with his kids around noon for about 5 hours, and she noticed that the whole time they were around, Graden acted really strangely. He barely interacted with any of them and instead watched a movie in the kitchen and stared at the wall in a rocking chair, as if he were in a trance, the worst mental state that Diane had reportedly ever seen him in. Around 5 p.m, when she was leaving with the kids, Graden asked her for a ride to his mum's place, and she agreed. However, he tried to sleep with her in a cornfield on the way. When she refused, he just stared blankly and gave an evil laugh, which freaked her out. At 5:39, Graden went into the Walmart in St. Joseph, Missouri, wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans. He bought 3 gas cans, then bought 7.427 gallons of diesel at Ferris Truck Stop in Fawcett and $15 worth of gasoline at Trex Mart in Trimble, which he put in one of the gas cans. He then went home and unleashed his plan. Graden entered the house with a gun and shot each of his family members in the head. Russell was shot once through the left eye, Shirley was shot once through the left scalp, Heather was shot in the face with a shotgun, then twice more that went through the brainstem, and Mason was shot once in the head and once in the right hand. The family dog, Jack, was shot at least 4 times in the neck, back, chest, and hindquarters. Then, like in the Boondock Saints, he mimicked his cinematic obsession, placing pennies on their eyes. He then dragged all their bodies outside, lined them up head to toe, poured a mixture of gasoline and diesel on them, and set them on fire. He also used an accelerant to set the house and Russell's car on fire. Immediately after setting the fires, Graden stole his mother's 2012 brown Nissan Versa, which he wasn't allowed to drive because of his revoked license. He loaded items, including a bag of .22 and .308 caliber ammunition, into the trunk and left Missouri, switching license plates twice in Oklahoma and Texas. At 11:30 p.m. on the same day, a neighbor noticed something glowing from the Denham house while driving home from work. When he went over to check it out, he was met with the sight of the house engulfed in flames. The neighbor immediately called 911 and they yelled for the grandparents while searching for them. 2 other neighbors joined them in the search and they came across what looked like mannequins. When they looked closely, they recognized Russell's body by his car, which made them realize they were not looking at mannequins, but the burnt bodies of the people they were looking for. Firefighters soon arrived on the scene and immediately got to work. One firefighter was horrified when he realized that what he thought was debris was actually Russell's body. They then preserved the scene after finding all the bodies, including the dog. The next day, an investigation conducted by multiple agencies began. Diane and some other family members tried to reach out to Graden, but he didn't respond. His sudden disappearance made him a primary suspect, and the investigators put out a multi-state manhunt for him. Meanwhile, a prayer vigil was held at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Edgerton, which was attended by about 150 people. Relatives couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of Graden being the killer, and Shelley Denham, Heather's mother, insisted Graden was innocent and close to Heather. The investigation went on for 3 days. Investigators uncovered fuel, weapons, and burn patterns, and autopsies confirmed execution-style shootings before the fire. After days of searching, the manhunt ended when at 7:36 a.m. on February 21st, 2016, an Arizona trooper found Graden in Arizona walking around near an elementary school with no clothes on. Graden gave him a wrong name and a false hitchhiking story before he was taken to a substation, given clothes, and sent by ambulance to Flagstaff. Around the same time, a motel manager reported the suspicious Nissan Versa at Stagecoach Inn to the police. The door was open, the key was still in the ignition, there were clothes and a wallet inside, and it had stolen Oklahoma plates. When the police came and checked the wallet, they found Graden's ID inside and tested the clothes for anything that could tie him to the incident. The black shirt tested positive for gunshot residue, the jeans for heavy petroleum distillate, and the gold shirt for Denham's blood and DNA, which they also found on the steering wheel. Graden was arrested and initially charged with vehicle theft and fiction. In early March, he returned to Missouri and was held in custody on those charges while the Plate County grand jury reviewed the incident involving his family. On June 27, 2016, Graden was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of armed criminal action, animal abuse, second-degree arson, tampering with evidence, and stealing a motor vehicle, and his bond was set at $4 million in cash only. Prosecutor Eric Zand said he would decide whether to seek the death penalty after gathering more information on the case. Then, on June 29, 2016, without an attorney, Graden pleaded not guilty to all the charges. His trial was stalled for years as the court debated his competency, reflecting his fractured mind. He was eventually ruled unfit to stand trial in 2020 and placed in the Missouri Department of Mental Health. The next year, he was tested and considered fit to stand trial, so the Plate County jury set his trial for December 2021. The prosecutor presented the evidence, describing it as a horrific night, but the defense argued that mental illness meant that he didn't intend to take the lives, so it couldn't constitute first-degree murder. Other witnesses, including Jack and the other neighbors, firefighters, investigators, and Diane, also gave their testimonies concerning the incident. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours before Graden was convicted on all charges. In exchange for not getting the death penalty, he agreed to not use the mental health defense. On February 2022, Judge James Van Amberg sentenced a now 30-year-old Graden to a total of 4 life sentences without parole for the lives lost and 115 years for the other offenses. Prosecutor Eric called it the only quadruple homicide in Plate County history and said Graden would die in prison.